Okay, so welcome to the seminar on that one person you can't stand. Going back to where we left off, it is a sense of humor is, of course, something so essential to any foundation. So even when you're looking at people who really piss you off, and keep that perspective of a sense of humor. And there is little that can substitute for a genuine liking of people when we start embracing and enjoying the carnival of life, the comedy of human existence, and we start appreciating people with all their quirks, their eccentricities, and we start enjoying them for who they are and for who they are not. An entirely new explosion of an entertaining experience opens up in our own lives. So I want to begin by stating that so much of the problems that we have of an interpersonal nature in this world happen because our capacity for loving, our capacity for emotional sensitivity is often destroyed in our childhood. And I'm not saying by mean ogres. There is something about the nature of the grown up that is very rough, tough, and abusive relative to the world of the child. The child's world is being likened to the wings of a butterfly, soft and sensitive. The child's emotional world is incredibly delicate. And the emotional world of the adult has been hardened. So, somebody talked about the metaphor of, if you put the boot on a butterfly's wings and tell the butterfly, I'm doing this for your own good. Many of us as adults have suffered so much trauma, we have got hardened shells. So when the world of the child and the world of the adult collides or clashes as it does, in the inevitable course of parenting, it turns out very badly for the child. And the child then decides he or she can only survive if they put up a wall or develop a very tough exterior in order to cope with the general level of emotional insensitivity and abusiveness that we find in the world of grown-ups. So by the standards of children, all grown-ups are emotionally abusive. Now, what happens is that the child's ability to love gets thwarted. In fact, even the whole meaning and experience of love is so corrupted in childhood because most of what passes for love in childhood is very conditional. Your parents will love you if you behave in this way. So many of us do not truly understand what it means to love freely and purely and joyously. Many of us, our experience of love is kind of tied up with various kinds of conditionalities. And this child starts losing its heart. That childhood is also becomes the source of many different challenges that will come our way as we grow up. So let me start with a few differences between the East and the West that might be interesting to you when we talk about this situation of that one person you can't stand. What are some insights? I want to first contrast the paradigms of the East and the West, and then I have about 10 or 15 points that I was able to extract or distill from different books that I read. I'll share with you the books and try to run through as many as I can. I know that we have little time and I'm very wordy, so we may not get through all of them. We can always cover the rest in another seminar. So I want us to recognize that Eastern mystics like Osho have always held that when people are being hurtful to you, we think they're conscious and awake and they're hurting us deliberately, but it is almost a tenet of Eastern wisdom that people are mean and hurtful because they're unconscious. In one way or another, they are not awakened souls. And therefore, they are being reactive, perhaps. They're not responding to you, they're reacting to you. We normally, our unconscious state is to live in fear, and often fear turns into anger. And so it is kind of weird. I look at my own life and I remember who I was when I was 4 and 5. I used to be remembered as such a loving child, so capable of affection. And as the years went by, I'm really puzzled who I turned out to be in my old age, emotionally abusive, through the middle-aged years, angry, full of rage and hate, vicious and mean to some of the people who loved me the most. It is just an inexplicable mystery. And it is true to each one of us. You see people who do very cruel things even in their adulthood. They were once very compassionate, joyous children. So what happened between then and then to the time that they became adults, that they lost that sensitivity, that compassionateness. So uh, it is the belief that people are unconscious, then they go through life experiences. They're conscious and alive as children, then they go through life experiences that then throws them into an unconscious state. And therefore, the task of maturity, the task of spiritual growth is to recover that innocence of childhood and the trusting ability. The other Eastern dictum is that man lives like a machine, that we live on the basis of past knowledge. If you remember last seminar, we talked about the difference between our mind as a camera that constantly takes photos and lives in the past and remembers and harbors grudges versus our mind as a mirror. The mirror doesn't retain anything. Things come and go, the mirror reflects it, and when the object has passed, the mirror is again not holding on to anything. A camera holds on to things. And often our minds function like a camera, which means that we are trying to relate to others through the lens of the past. Now, as we know, as Osho says, truth cannot be known from memory. Truth requires us to be able to see reality clearly. And the challenge is that the memory doesn't allow us to see things clearly. Often in a relationship, when you're trying to recall, and most of us have a lot of unfinished baggage in almost all our relationships, our memory will tell us about things that have never happened and will make it seem that they are there. And it'll also make us miss a lot that has happened that we might selectively leave out. And excuse me, there is a beautiful poem about the owl and flying through um, meadows, flying over a set of pristine meadows full of fruits and flowers and clean running water. But in this poem, the owl is holding on to a dead rat in its mouth. And for whatever reason, it will not drop the dead rat, even though it is flying over trees and meadows and flowers. This metaphor is sometimes akin to those relationships in which we are feeling aggravated. Often we carry grudges, we carry unhappinesses, like we cling to the dead rats. It's like the fly, says Osho, that will fly towards the putrid meat and leave the fragrant sandalwood alone. That we sometimes have an addiction to keep going back to these experiences that leave us feel victimized and aggravated, and keep recycling them over and over again. So another major difference before I start talking about the practical tips is of the difference between witnessing and analyzing. Western psychology and Western social sciences took the path of analyzing, that you analyze anything, your relationships, you try to process them, you understand them. And often through analysis, you get a beautiful systems perspective of everything, of how everybody is contributing to the dynamics. Now, along with analysis is the idea that these experiences have left a trace in us. Like for example, like the tires of a car that leave their tread in the snow. These past experiences that have caused us pain, the people that have caused us pain have left this. And the way to evolve out of this is actually to process it and to wipe the slate clean so that those tire marks are removed. That's one approach, and that's the path of analysis. The East has taken a very different metaphor. So, for example, while the West has taken the psychological realities and converted it into a material form, what do I mean by that? We talk about psychological wound. Do you see that when we talk about a psychological wound, we are converting it into a material form, like there's actually a wound there, like an injury? Then you will imagine like a scraped knee or a braised elbow or something like that. So it has taken the emotional and psychic phenomena that have happened and converted it into material metaphors. That has been beautiful because there's been so much progress in the healing professions in the West. But it has left us with the metaphor that things take time to heal. When you hurt yourself, it's going to take time to heal. And Western psychotherapy has therefore talked about the necessity of processing over time and healing from those experiences. Eastern traditions like Zen, Sufism, Tantra have taken a different metaphor. They have taken the metaphor of the sky, that our consciousness, our psyche is like the sky. When a bird flies through the sky, does it leave a tread mark? Does it leave footprints? No, it just disappears. All kinds of atrocities have been committed under the sky, including the Holocaust. But notice that the sky has retained its purity, has retained its um, innocence. So it is with human consciousness. So the East has developed, while the West developed analysis, the East developed an approach called witnessing to relieve us of different kinds of emotional distress, including the kind of upset that we have in relationships. The Eastern approach is that if the thoughts and feelings that come up, so think of this person that you really despise, and think of the thoughts and feelings that come up when they when you think of them, that those are like the clouds. And in the West, you have to clear the clouds, you have to understand and process the clouds. The East says your consciousness is like the sky. If you start looking beneath the clouds, you will see a sky. You will see both the other person that you despise as living under a sky of human consciousness, and you will experience the vastness of your own sky. In other words, the East would say instant transformation is possible in any of your relationships. That if you can recognize that there are no wounds, the wounds is just a metaphor from physical injury. It is like the bird has flown through the sky and has left no tracks in it. And just that the sky has no form, so it can be reconstituted instantly. There can be a lot of cloud-bearing clouds, the sadness and the drama. And suddenly the wind can blow all the clouds aside and you can have a clear sky. We are just as flexible and malleable in terms of our consciousness. I want to shift gears and come to a few tips that I believe from my own experiences and those of others have been very helpful. I draw upon a few books. One of them is called Compassion by Osho, O-S-H-O. It's a very beautiful book on compassion. Of course, the one that I constantly refer to is Intimacy by Osho that I recommend to all of us. And another one is called Speak to Us of Love, Reflections on Khalil Gibran, Osho's book, Speak to Us of Love. I draw upon these three books as my primary source of inspiration for some of what I will share. So the first thing to do is to illuminate where I'm standing. And what do we mean by that? Whenever we are relating to somebody or processing a relationship, we are coming from a certain place and a certain orientation towards that person. Often, where we are coming from is our blind spot. The person who receives us is able to see where we are coming from, but we ourselves cannot see where we are coming from. It's like Werner Erhard once said, your point of view is not visible to you because your point of view is the point from which you view. So if it is the point from which you view, how can you see it? It's almost like I have an inability to see the back of my eyeballs. Can I see the back of my eyeballs? No. Can I see my eyeballs? I can't, because the eyeballs are what I look through, whereas you can see my eyeballs. This very simple existential fact that I cannot see where I'm coming from. If I'm coming from a place of distrust, that I fundamentally distrust you, I'm unfortunately not able to see. It becomes my blind spot, whereas the person receiving and hearing me is able to see that. And this just becomes a major challenge in relationships because often we are looking at people through multiple pairs of lenses. Some of our lenses are cracked, but we cannot see that my glasses are cracked. I will see as if you are cracked. And that is one of the challenges. And if, for example, we start wearing yellow sunglasses and approach human beings with a lack of trust, it is very likely that over time, we will accumulate layers upon layers and we will generate certain dynamics that become a self-fulfilling prophecy. For those of you who were alive and kicking in the 70s, you might have heard a book titled, I'm okay, you're not, you're okay. So this was a book in transactional analysis, and it was essentially talking about what is the ego state from where I might be relating to the world. And it's always harder to diagnose one's own ego states because we are to them as fish are to water, but it's very easy to diagnose other people's ego states. So for each one of you here, just check in with yourself and see. One ego state is where I'm relating to everyone as I'm okay, you're okay. There's a certain kind of dynamic, that smoothness that results from those interactions. The second ego state is I'm not okay, but you are okay. We all know people who feel that fundamentally in some way they're broken, there's something wrong with them, but they think you're okay. So I could be coming from I'm not okay, there's something wrong with me, but you're okay. That leads to a deep sense of inferiority in how I might relate to you, a sense of not okayness. Another ego state that you find people relating to you from is if I come to you like I'm okay and you're not okay. And we run into people all the time who say, I'm okay. They feel they are okay. And you are the one that's the problem. And then, of course, there are people who feel, I'm not okay and you're not okay. These are people who might be profoundly unhappy at different levels. They feel they're broken and they might think and experience you also as being broken. These are the four ego states that come from transactional analysis, which is the Western method. If it was an Eastern mystic, they would attach a fifth ego state. That would be of the watcher, the witnesser. What is the phenomenon of watching and witnessing? It is the idea that if you can start merely watching the thoughts and feelings that are arising in you, as if they're clouds floating through the sky of your consciousness, different kinds of thoughts and feelings will come and go. You don't get sucked into the unnecessary stress and tension that they produce, but you just say, stay pure as a watcher, a witnesser, or observer of your own thoughts and feelings. And by becoming an observer and witnesser, neither agreeing with your thoughts and feelings, nor by disagreeing with it, you become a watcher and witness. So it's an opportunity for each of us to check in and say, in my interactions, do I come across as I'm okay, you're okay? Or I'm okay, you're not okay? Or I'm not okay, but you're okay? Or I'm not okay and you're not okay? Usually begin the exercise by thinking of other people, because our minds are so well defended that we are able to see patterns in other people, but our own patterns that are nearest to us are the ones that are most invisible to us. Another challenge in relationship is to know that opposites attract. So often you will find two people being really attracted to each other because at some level they're opposites. But we also know that because they're opposites, that opposites can cause the attraction, but it can also cause the opposition. So the same attraction creates the opposition, says Osho, as between men and women. Now, what do we do with knowing this? To be able to celebrate complementarities. I know a couple that often call me for help with their relationship because I've been married 4 times. Many people experience that from that. They should take my advice. That's like saying, because I've been bankrupt in my life, you should learn how to run your business from me. It doesn't always work. But one of them sees themselves as very intelligent. They're very sharp and smart. They are the intelligent person in the couple. The other person sees themselves as very kind and loving and generous. Now, imagine the person who's intelligent sees themselves as intelligent and sees the other person as stupid and are demeaning that person. The person who's very kind sees themselves as so kind, but sees the other person as cruel and unkind. Notice in this relationship, both are unhappy. Imagine if they were to embrace the principle of synergy and complementarity and pool their beautiful strengths together, what would they become as a couple? They would become an intelligent and kind couple. That is the potential for synergy that exists when we are able to drop the boundaries that separate us and say, you know what, let's jam together and let's produce the music that we can. You know, the opposites and the differences that are there in us can be a source of tension, but that tension can be transformed into creativity. Seeing the world through the eyes of the other. I grew up in a very strange family where my mother was always worried that we did not have enough money and we would be on the streets and homeless, that we were always on the brink of a financial collapse. My father, on the other hand, was the eternal optimist. Even if there was no money in the house, he would feel that he is abundant and wealthy as an emperor. Now, my brother was telling me that this uh, difference between my mom and dad has resulted in the kids becoming dysfunctional about money, that none of the children really understood. Did we have a lot of money or did we have no money at all, because you had two parents who had such different views of the world. And I once remember asking my dad to explain it, and he said something. He said, if you want to understand what's really going on, you should not be looking at how much money we have in the family. You should look at the world through the eyes of your mother, and then look at the world through the eyes of your father. And then you will understand everything. It reminded, years later, I encountered a statement by the editor of the Encyclopedia Britannica, Mortimer Adler, writing about Buddhism. He said, if you want to study any religion like Buddhism or Christianity, don't study the scriptures. Try to understand the world through the eyes of the Buddhist, through the eyes of the Christian, and everything makes sense. You will understand it better than the scriptures. So here's another tip: seeing the world through the eyes of the other. And I have seen, even in situations you will find when you feel the other person is being utterly unreasonable, when you actually take the time to see the world through their lenses, it makes perfect sense. And that is why you see that it is not that they're being utterly irrational, it is that the reality that they're seeing is very different, which brings me to the next point, which is relationships as theater and the tragedy of multiple narratives. Many of us have gone to plays in the pre-COVID era. And in the pre-COVID era, you would notice that in a play, there is a beam of light that is illuminating the stage. And a hero and heroine, or two actor and actress, are talking to each other. And that beam of light puts the spotlight on that interaction, on that conversation. There is much that is happening in the auditorium that you cannot see because it's all in darkness. Imagine a mischievous stagehand goes on and turns on all the lights on the stage. You will see all kinds of things that are part of what's going on, but are not part of the main narrative. There are stagehands holding little prompters, waiting to prompt the actor and actresses in case they forget. There are people with glasses of water. Maybe there are people on the side trying to set up the stage for the next scene. There's somebody in the audience who has fallen asleep and is not even watching the play. All this is part of what's happening in that complex reality, if you take a systems perspective. But the beam of light only illuminates that little piece. So it is, folks, with our realities and our relationships. Each one of us are living in our own private worlds, and that private world is given by the beam of light that illuminates one part of the narrative of the situation. But if each of one is living in a private world, it follows that the other person is living in their world with their narrative. And here is the challenge. We have a deep desire, and see if you can relate to this. I'm going to put some emotion into this because I have felt this every now and then. We have a deep desire to be acknowledged for our narrative. If I'm in a misunderstanding with you, I want you to acknowledge my narrative. And the other person has a deep longing to be acknowledged for their narrative. Now, but what happens in relationships is that we are not vast enough. We don't believe that it is possible for my narrative to be acknowledged and for the other person's narrative to be acknowledged. We sometimes imagine that the other person's perception and diagnosis and narrative of the situation is opposite of mine. And therefore, we start arguing. No, the world is large enough for multiple narratives to be accommodated. It is very much like a people's history of the United States. What's the history of the United States? Is it the history of the United States as experienced through the lens of the Native Americans, as Howard Zinn points out? Is it the history of the United States that the Native Americans will tell you happened? Is it the history of the United States that the African Americans will tell you has happened? Is it the history of the United States that the people who came from Europe tell you happened? And based on which country they came from, they had a completely different narrative. Even in our country at this point, we have to try to understand the pluralism of reality, the multiplicity of narratives. And we have a deep desire to be acknowledged. So to the extent that we can acknowledge another person's narrative, it often gives them room and space to acknowledge your narrative. But too often when the other person starts sharing their narrative, it contradicts ours. And we start wanting to chisel that to fit it into the Procrustean bed or framework that we have. No, let them share their narrative. Embrace all relationships, recognizing we are all living in private worlds. Let everybody have their narrative. Have conversations with people who you fear have a narrative that might threaten yours. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. If everybody shares their narrative, this will be a beautiful world with so many different colors and so many different types of flowers that are blooming all at the same time. Another challenge in evolving in relationships is this. Osho talks about 3 layers to a human being. See if you can relate to this. The first layer, he says, is a very cosmetic layer. It's a very polite layer. It's the social mask that we wear everywhere we go. Right? Now, if you scratch that layer, and that layer is very easily disturbed, you're very smiling, driving happily in your car. Somebody doesn't see you in their mirror and cuts into your lane. In an instant, the most colorful language will be coming out of your mouth and you'll be flicking them off and all of that, because the superficial layer of politeness is very thin. Once you scratch that, and what happens in a growing intimacy in a relationship between parents and children, between significant others, is that that layer is very quickly disturbed. And then there is this vast layer that we all carry of anger, jealousy, possessiveness, pain, sadness, despair, depression. It is very deep. And working through that layer with mindfulness, with witnessing, with compassion for ourselves. And that's something that I just want us to remember. Unless we have compassion for ourselves and the struggles that we have lived through in life, it's almost impossible that we will be able to shower that kind of compassion on the other, shower that kind of love on the other. And therefore, the next layer is all that annoyance. And once you go through that layer, there is a deeper layer that emerges. That is of childhood innocence, but mystics have also called it the godly lamp. What do we mean by that? It is the recognition that somebody that you might despise and hate, you might hate and despise what you're seeing at the surface layers, the first 2 layers. But if you look deep within their heart and deep within their soul, you will see that there's a lamp of godliness, if you will, of divinity, if you're not particularly, if you're an atheistic person, of sacredness that is shining within each one of us. Those difficult conversations you have, if you can look beyond the dung and all the thorns and barbed wire that we put out as human beings to protect ourselves, and you can go over that, you will connect with the lamp, which is their essence. Now, I want us to say that when one part of it is the art of looking deeply into the soul of a person to understand what the nature of the lamp is. And the Eastern mystics like Osho will tell you that the lamp has often got covered with so much dirt and dust that you're mistaking the dirt and dust for the person. Wipe the dirt and dust, and inside the lamp will glow. And how do you understand what the lamp is? Here's what I would say. Every person has this divine lamp, and the lamp could be different. When I'm functioning from my deepest core, I am a very loving presence. Not that I'm there all the time, but that's the potential that I carry within me. Who I am is love. Now, somebody else will who they are is truth, just the pure truth. Their lamp is one of truth, not necessarily of love. Each of us has that lamp. Often, to understand what is the type of flame, you have to look at what people complain about a lot. You know how we don't like to be around people when they're complaining? Because we are put off by complaints. I would encourage each one of us to start listening to the complaints, because as some psychologists have pointed out, what people are complaining about is actually a reflection of what they're truly committed to. A person's deepest commitments are often revealed by their constant complaining. Underneath the complaint, you can translate it into a commitment. People who are complaining about lack of integrity, you might be sick and tired of their complaint, but deep down, there might be a commitment to truth, and that might be the lamp that is shining inside them. The other point I would like to make is uh, is about embracing and celebrating the irremediable subjectivity of each of us. So remember, we exist both as objects and as subjects. I am an object. It is Sartre who used to say that the other is hell. The existentialist philosopher, he says the other is hell. In every human relationship, people are experiencing hell. Well, that could be true if you approach people as a problem to be solved. If you approach people as a problem to be solved, you start treating them as objects. If my cell phone doesn't work, I want to fix it so that it starts working. If my car doesn't run, I want to fix it that I start running. We are surrounded by a world of objects, so we enter into relationships which are I, it. I am a person, but you are an object that has to be manipulated to fit into my grand plan. But as you know, people don't are not objects. They're complex, they're messy, and if we approach people as a problem to be solved, there will be more and more problems. If we start approaching people as a vast ocean of mystery to be embraced, not as a problem to be solved, it is a discovery. The other person is somebody to be discovered. And then all of a sudden, the nature of that relationship itself transforms, because when people are related to as if they're people, so it's not a I-it relationship, or as Martin Buber, the existential theologian, calls it, it's an I-thou relationship. Something very deep ends up exploding within us. I want to just briefly touch upon a couple of points. The ecology of gratitude. When we are upset with somebody and there's that one person that we cannot stand, we often forget all the things that we could be deeply grateful for. That person could be dealing with us in a much worse way than they are already doing. Maybe they're complaining about us, but there's always, and it's also more of a holistic approach to life. When we are connected with a deep sense of gratitude for what life has given us, those problem spots that life gives us, you can also enjoy, you can also accept, because the best vaccine for hatred is gratitude. When you're hating somebody, if you can connect with a deeper sense of inner gratitude for everything that life has given, then all of the problems sometimes start disappearing. Another recognition that is very important is that problems are fundamentally insolvable. When we approach a person as a problem to be solved, we might have a solution for that situation, but every solution of today will lead to a new problem tomorrow. And we find this repeatedly with life. Problems are fundamentally insolvable. Embracing life as a mystery, embracing people as a mystery, just as you accept the rose flower. The rose has its beautiful petals and it's fragrant, it's soft, but it also has its thorns. So are people. They have their fragrance and they have their thorns, and it is the totality that nature has meant it to be. Just like peaks come with valleys, roses come with the fragrance and the thorns, human beings too come with things that are deeply a source of joy for us, a source of great happiness. But the same human beings who we love, we also become very capable of hating, because that is just the nature of relationships, until we get to a deeper love where you can embrace the person in their totality, when you can embrace the part of you that loves and the part of you that hates. When you can embrace that, you will end up with an unconditional acceptance out of which a new level of lovingness happens. The final point I want to end with, two quick points. One of them I call the tough question. And I have repeatedly found in life, there are many times I've gotten really mad at people and I've demonized them. I've spent much of my life being very vicious and mean to people, truth be told. And I have later begun to recognize that when I have accused somebody and demonized them of something, but have stopped and said, where in my life have I done this to somebody else? I'm accusing somebody of doing this to me. Where in my life have I done this to somebody else? All of a sudden, the light bulbs have come on. And all of a sudden, my hatred has dissipated. Because often the things that disturb us most about other people are things that we fear are there within ourselves. If I have a terrible ego or a terrible temper, I will be very annoyed at other people with a terrible ego or terrible temper, because their side reminds me of something inside me that I'm trying to overcome, and it creates a precariousness. And the very final point, I promise I've gone over time and keep saying final point, and people are thinking, where is that final point, Param? This is it, folks, is gratitude to the person who you cannot stand. Why do I say this? Because when people piss you off and you can't stand them, that person came into your room and opened the door of your closet and exposed all the emotions that are there trapped within us for so long. Now, what happens is we end up arguing and fighting with the person saying, why did you open my closet? And that's a very valid reason. If somebody opens your closet against your wishes, you have justified in being pissed off. And you could work at that level of making sure that person doesn't open that closet, making sure that person isn't there. But there's a deeper level that you could go to, and this is a cosmic level, a metaphysical level. You could say, well, at some level, this person did me a favor because they did something so profoundly annoying that they opened the closet door that gave me an opportunity to see all the trapped emotion that was within me. And then we can go to work on that trapped emotion so that we may move into that level of inner compassion, total compassion, which is the only antidote to be able to enjoy people. People are amazingly beautiful and they're amazingly annoying at the same time. And for us to be able to hold the duality is the transcendence of is the ultimate transcendence in relationships. Folks, I have gone well over time. I apologize. It was a very emotional topic as I connected with the ways in which I have myself struggled to grow in my life. The formal part of the webinar is closed. As you know, we have a convention that I linger on for a few minutes to take any questions, to listen to any comments that people might have, or to listen to any stories that people might share. So this is the point at which we stop recording so that nobody has to feel that something that they say will be put on my YouTube channel. If you have a desire to be on the mailing list for these seminars, we take up topics like this, please text me at 216-374-7413. Jessica, would you just type up my cell phone number so you can give me an email to which I can send you further notifications if you want to be included. Otherwise, the formal part of the seminar is over. I profoundly express my gratitude to you for your presence today. I will be recording and posting it on the YouTube channel. And for those of you who wish to stay a few extra minutes to share sentiments, to share stories, we will continue. But otherwise, have a wonderful rest of the weekend and may the love be with you. Thank you so much.
Hi, Pram. It's Bridget. I wanted to say thank you for you made a ton of really wonderful points. Two of them stood out to me. One is how you had the caveat at the beginning that this doesn't include excusing abusive behavior. So that was really excellent. And another thing you brought up that we don't talk about a whole lot was something that I also learned from a history professor, that if you want to understand why people did the things they did, you need to understand the mindset of the people. So I really appreciated that comment. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. That was a very helpful comment. I appreciate it. Thank you.